on, and the world, it appears, has gone absolutely mad as all the mentally ill gather in Davos this week. We have Exercise Steadfast Defender. Of course, we were talking about this on Monday. We mentioned the fact that the UK is sending 20,000 troops to take part in this NATO exercise. This is the largest NATO exercise in decades. It's, they said, going to put new Allied defence plans into trial. Of course, this is all about Russia. 90,000 troops from all 31 allies and invitee Sweden will train together in order to keep their people safe, they say, defend their territory and safeguard their shared values. So let's just have a look at a little bit of video here. This is Admiral Rob Bauer speaking at the recent Defence Ministers' meeting.
Welcome to this 190th Military Committee in Chiefs of Defence session. The tectonic plates of power are shifting, and as a result, we face the most dangerous world in decades. NATO has entered into a new era of collective defense, and together we are defending much more than the physical safety of our 1 billion people and 31, soon to be 32, nations. We are defending freedom and democracy.
So by creating war, they are defending freedom and democracy. This is brilliant stuff. Now, the 32nd member, of course, is going to be Ukraine. So at Davos a couple of days ago, Jens Stoltenberg, well, he had this to say.
Security is not longer regional, security is global. So what happens in Asia matters for Europe, and what happens in Europe matters for Asia. And therefore, of course, we don't regard China as an adversary, but China's heavy investments in modern military capabilities, including more and more advanced nuclear weapons.
So while they're exercising about Russia, of course, China is there as well, and NATO expanding massively at the moment. Now, back in 2020, the NATO expansion shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's been watching the UK column news, because we covered this in 2020. NATO launched its NATO 2030 policy document. This was all about, they said, making the alliance even stronger. This is about the expansion of the alliance outside of its normal remit, which is Europe, and into Asia as well. Now, at the time, or sometime later, a French retired general had this to say about NATO 2030 policy. So let's bring him on screen. This is retired General Grégoire Diamantidis. He's a former French Air Force general. And he said, NATO 2030 sets out NATO's missions for the next 10 years. From the outset, it's evident that NATO is fully gearing itself towards a two-threat paradigm, a Russian menace, which presented as already present, and a Chinese menace presented as potential and yet to come. Two key vectors leap out from NATO 2030, this NATO 2030 study. He said, first, the marshalling of Europeans against Chinese designs on planetary domination, the quid pro quo for which is US protection of Europe against the Russian threat. Second, the removal in several ways of NATO's previous cornerstone, the rule of consensus in decision-making. And he went on to say, in reading through NATO 2030, what clearly emerges is a monument of quiet bad faith, surreptitious disinformation, and exploiting the Russian threat. Remember, this is a retired French general talking this. He's talking about NATO's behavior here. He goes on to say, they talk about a threat blatantly created and subsequently maintained to make European allies toe the US line in preparation for the looming struggle with China for global hegemony. He said, not only do you plan to transform defensive NATO into an offensive alliance against an enemy that is not Europe's enemy, and we've got to remember this issue of transforming defensive into offensive, this is Britain's defence policy as well. He goes on to say, this report goes further, squarely heading for an organisation where the world political ambition, that's NATO he's talking about, holding sway over all other international organisations. Not content with having wrecked Europe's chance of a real lasting peace desired by all, NATO, motivated only by self-preservation and overreach, has triggered massive rearmament. And now through this NATO 2030 document, you seek to justify the military purpose of this alliance by transforming it into a political instrument that can even override United Nations resolutions and national sovereignty. This defies even elementary logic, which dictates that the mission should justify the tool and not vice versa. Didn't even the Romans say that soldiery must yield to statesmanship? So no, Mr. Secretary General, we must stop this mad train before it's too late. France should never go along with this adventure of accepting American tutelage of Europe without betraying General de Gaulle's principles. We must stop this mad train before it's too late. It's absolutely clear now, as you'll see in a second, that the rhetoric is one of war, and we've got to stop it. So let's just remind ourselves about how NATO has been expanding. First of all, let's have a look at this. The joint statement on the Trilateral United States, Japan, Republic of Korea, Indo-Pacific dialogue. This was January the 6th, 2024. So again, we've got expansion into Asia by NATO. Then we've got the potential for a NATO office in Japan. Now that seems to be dropped in the short term, but that's certainly still being talked about. We've already talked about the AUKUS partnership. This is the United States, the UK, and Australia, and this moving into Asia as well. And also the Quad, which brings in India and Korea into this as well. So just to reinforce this then, let's look at another quick excerpt from Jens Stoltenberg's presentation at Davos a couple of days ago.
China's way of behavior, especially in the South China Sea, and the way China is actually violating core principles for NATO, democracy, the rule of law, journalism, freedom of expression, as we have seen in Hong Kong. All of that matters for NATO. And we also have to understand that this is not about NATO moving into Asia, but it's about the fact that China is coming closer to us. We see them in Africa, we see them in the Arctic, we see them trying to control critical infrastructure. Not so many years ago, I had a big discussion about 5G. And many allies said this is only a commercial issue. No, it's also an issue about our security.
So China is coming closer to us, so we need to go to war with China. Is it not a bit ironic that he's talking about criticizing China there for freedom of expression in Hong Kong, at the same time that Western governments in the EU, the UK and the US are busy shutting down freedom of expression as quickly as they possibly can? It is quite incredible. In the meantime, and in parallel then, Bild published this article, and we'll do a quick translation of the headline. This was a few days ago. Bundeswehr is preparing for Putin attack. Bild knows this is the scenario. Tens of thousands of German soldiers would be deployed. So, you know, they were talking about a path to conflict. They were talking about the various scenarios being given, ascribed to Russia, which were just ridiculous scenarios. But in the meantime, absolutely pointing out the ramping up of the war drums in Germany. And so the Mail decided to carry an interview with Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commander of the US Army in Europe. So let's just have a look at what he had to say. He said the UK has always been aware of the threat from Russia. Well, actually, the UK has done a lot to create the threat from Russia, if there is a threat. Certainly the threat that the UK claims there is through the Integrity Initiative. And if you want to get some background on that, have a look at the page on the UK Column website, a whole bunch of articles related to the Integrity Initiative and how the UK government has built this narrative, this anti-Russian narrative. Hodges went on to say, but now Germany is realizing that this is something that's only going to get worse if they're not prepared. So readiness is exactly what nations should be doing, and Germany is doing that. If the civilian leadership doesn't think there's a threat, they won't be able to move quickly enough. Our leaders should talk to us like adults, he said. It doesn't mean you're a scaremonger. It means you're taking precaution, which is exactly what we should be doing. In the meantime, the UK getting together, because of course it's a hybrid war. It's not just about real kinetic warfare. It's also about cyber warfare and information warfare and so on. So the UK has decided to get closer to Japan with respect to cyber warfare again. So this is on Wednesday. Oliver Dowden meeting Japanese to join together on cybersecurity issues. But the whole war drums rhetoric got particularly ridiculous in Sweden this week when they had their War of the Worlds moment. And the Swedish Minister for Civil Defence in a public address said, it is time for Sweden to prepare for war. That was followed up by the Prime Minister saying, be prepared to die in arms in defence of values. And as a result, Sweden saw a massive response from the public. They were going out buying portable radios, they were going out buying torches, they were going out buying a whole bunch of other things for preparation for war, clearing the shelves of it. There was such a backlash to this that the Prime Minister had to basically walk back from his original statement. So let's put this on screen. We'll do a quick translation of this as well. So the headline is from Omni here, that he said that all countries close to Russia will be affected. But he's basically saying it's quite obvious that the risk of war has increased considerably. But he's saying that there's nothing to suggest that war is imminent. So the war drums are banging as hard as they possibly can at the moment. And the point here is we've all been warned. And the question is, are we going to sit back and wait for it to happen? Are we going to react like people of Sweden have reacted by going and buying the things that we think that we need because war is coming and there's nothing can be done to stop it? Or are we going to basically tell these people that this position is unacceptable and they need to come back from where they are? At the moment, we are in a very dangerous position, but it's not one that's that it isn't possible to come back from. We've just got to make sure that our position is well understood. Ben, let me bring you onto the program and welcome you and say, have you any thoughts about this? What do you think of the rhetoric that we're seeing at the moment from these people?
I mean, it beggars belief, really, doesn't it? The direction of travel, like we were talking about earlier, just feels like they're trying to drag us into another forever war. The only upside I can see from this is that if we're going to wake up the younger generation, it's going to be them who end up dying on the battlefield. So I think that this will certainly pique their attention.
That's what we can hope. Okay, let's move.